Hey guys, what's going on? It's Dave from Evil Eye Games. Today we're going to continue on with the 10th video in our series on creating a third-person cover shooter. Now, one thing to note before we get started, I did update my weapon firing rate. So I made it fire a little bit faster. I set it to a default of 0.15. So you'll see when I test it out that my weapon is going to be firing faster than it was in the previous video. So for today's video, we're going to deal with when the player can and can't fire. Now, if I go to test it out, I'll hit play, and I can fire my weapon. And if I take cover, the character still continues to fire his weapon. It doesn't matter what he's doing. If I get out of cover and I start sprinting with the character, he fires the weapon when he sprints. And I can start firing the weapon while he sprints. So we want to wrangle in when the player can have the character fire the weapon. So in order to do this, first we're going to go into our characters folder. We're going to go into our player characters and open up our 3P player character. Now I'm going to add in a new variable. It's going to be of type Boolean, and I'm going to call it CanFire. So simply put, it's going to check to see whether or not our player can or cannot fire. And then at our fire weapon, I'm going to grab the fire and the stop fire weapon. I'm going to drag these off to the side. Grab our equipped weapon and drag that off to the side as well. And I'm going to put a branch in between fire weapon, the event, and fire weapon, the function. And we're going to check this can fire variable. I'm going to go ahead and plug that in. And I'll resize our comment box to fit everything. And we'll go ahead and compile. And this CanFire variable should be at a default of true, because under normal circumstances, we want to be able to fire the weapon normally. Now we have to have a way to toggle whether we can or cannot fire the weapon. So I'm going to go up to functions, and I'm going to create a new function. And we're going to call this setCanFire. So much like with our set is taking cover function, if we want to call on this function outside of the blueprint, we want to do it through a function rather than direct reference to the variable. And setCanFire is going to have a single input, and it's going to be a Boolean, and we'll call it CanFire. And what we want to do is grab our CanFire variable, and we're going to set it, and we're going to plug our execution and Boolean pins in. Now, one other thing to note at this point, too, is that if we set the CanFire to false, it won't necessarily stop the weapon from firing. So what we're going to want to do is add in a branch after CanFire, and we'll plug in our execution pin and CanFire to the condition. So if CanFire gets set to false, we want to stop firing our weapon. So I'm going to drag off the false, and we're going to search for stop fire weapon. So if we end up setting our CanFire variable false, it's going to call the stop fire weapon on our weapon. And in particular, this stop fire weapon is actually a reference to the event in the event graph. It's not a direct reference to the weapon. So if it hits this false parameter, it's going to go back to our event graph, and it's going to grab this stop fire weapon custom event, which will call on the weapon to stop firing the weapon. So I'm going to close that, and we're going to compile and save. And now we're actually going to need to call this at different instances. Now I'm going to take care of the sprinting first. So in order to do this, I'm going to go into our 3P player controller, and we're going to go to where we sprint. So we have our sprint button command here. We check to see if move forward is greater than 0. If it is, we set sprinting. But after we set is sprinting, we also want to grab our player character reference here, and we'll get that. And then we want to call our setCanFire function, and we want to set CanFire to false. So I'll go ahead and drag that comment box out to fit it. And another thing to note here with the sprint button, and this is going to come into play with us taking cover now, and the fact that it does the set CanFire action here, is that we don't want to set is sprinting when we're in cover. So since we updated the movement controller so we can actually use move forward and move right while in cover, you can technically set is sprinting while you're in cover. So I'm going to grab our player character reference here. I'm going to drag it back. And I'll put in a reroute node there. And then we want to add in a new condition for this branch. And we want to check from our player character. We want to see if we're taking cover. So we're going to get is taking cover. And we want this to be true when is taking cover is false. So I'm going to drag off of is taking cover and grab a not operator. And we want both of these conditions to be true when the branch fires. So I'll go ahead and drag this off a little bit more. And we'll put in an and operator. And then we'll connect our not is taking cover in, and we'll connect that to our branch. And at this point, we'll go ahead and compile and save. And one last thing here. For the set CanFire, for setting CanFire, we want it to be the opposite of sprinting. So I'm going to put in a not operator. And I'm going to plug that not operator from is sprinting. So if we're not sprinting, we can fire. If we are sprinting, we can't fire. So we'll go ahead and connect that up. And we'll compile and save. And I'll hit play to test it out. So I can fire if I'm moving around. If I start sprinting, I can't fire any longer. If I hit shift to stop sprinting, I can fire again. Now, if we start sprinting and I let go of the movement key, it won't allow me to start firing again because there is a event notify in our anim BP that controls the stop sprinting. So I'm going to go back to our main window, and in our content browser here, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to open up our 3P player anim BP, and that anim notify fires in our sprint stop animation here. So I'm going to double click on our sprint stop, and I'm going to open up our rifle sprint stop animation. So we have this animation at the very beginning here that stops us from sprinting. Now we want to set our characters so that they can fire, but we don't want to do it at this very beginning of the animation. Now, one thing to keep in mind here is that when going between these animations, there is some blending occurring. So if you add a notify at the very end, it probably won't get called. So about 4 bars in from the end of our notify line, I'm going to go ahead and right click. I'm going to go to add notify, and we're going to create a new notify. Now this is the point where we want our character to be able to shoot again. So I'm going to call this one CanFire. I'm going to save this animation, and we're going to go back to our graph, and we're going to go into the event graph. And we're going to right click, and we're going to find that event notify, CanFire. And we're going to want to call the function within our player character. So I'm going to copy the try get pawn owner and the cast to 3P player character. And I'm going to paste these in place and connect our CanFire. And then from our as 3P player character, I'm going to go ahead and call that function. So we're going to search for set CanFire. And we want this to be set to true. So when the CanFire anim notify plays, it's going to set in our character that our character can actually fire the weapon. So I'm going to go ahead and compile and save. And if we hit play, we can go ahead and test this out. So if I start sprinting with the sprint button, I can't fire the weapon. If I let go of the forward movement key, alright, so it looks like our character is not going back to a state when he can fire. So to troubleshoot this after our CanFire event, let's drag out, and I'm going to put it in a print screen, or a print string. And for the text, I'll just call it CanFire. So if we compile and save and hit play, if I sprint and take my finger off the key, he is not firing that event. So we're going to have to probably go back into the animation. So in our sprint stop animation, I'm going to drag this CanFire over to the next vertical line over. And we'll save that. And let's try it again. So if I start sprinting and then I let go of the forward motion key, he does actually trigger it. So like I mentioned earlier with the blending between the animations, it might cut off parts of the animation. So you definitely want to test these things before you move on to the next, because you might find problems later down the road. So for now we have the sprinting animation and when we can and can't fire down pat, but we still have to take care of when our character can fire in and out of cover. So for this, we're going to go back to our player anim BP. So we're going to have to figure out when our character can fire when he's in cover and when he can't. First of all, when we take cover, we have our take cover animation here. So that's when he moves from either sprinting or walking into his take cover position. And this is definitely going to be a point where he's not going to be able to start shooting. So I'm going to open up that take cover animation. And we're going to want to add a notify in. So at the very beginning of the track, I'm going to right click, add notify, and we're going to add a new notify. And we're going to call this notify cannot fire. And I'll save the animation. We're going to go back to our graph. And in our event graph here, we're going to have to add in that anim notify. So we're going to search for cannot fire. And I'm going to copy this cast to 3P player character and connect our try get pawn owner to the object. And I'll copy this set CanFire as well. And we'll plug our character reference and the execution pin in. And you know what? I'm going to copy this print string as well. So we can do this for testing purposes. And in this one, I'm just going to have it say cannot fire. And we'll compile and save that. And I was playing around with this a bit before I was recording this video, and I ran into an issue where in our state machine here, I was setting it so that when the character went to aim and went to stop aiming, there were notifies in there that, based on where the animation was, didn't trigger at the right times. So what we're going to do now is when we are in the cover right and cover left position, we want to be not able to shoot. And when we're in our aim left and our aim right position, we want to be able to shoot. So I'm going to go ahead and open up our cover left. And I'm going to open up that animation. And at the very beginning, I'm going to right click, we're going to add a notify, and we're going to set that we cannot fire. I'm going to save this, go back to our graph, and then we want to select the aim left, and we're going to open up this animation. And at the very beginning of the animation, I'm going to add a notify, and we're going to set that we can fire. And then we'll go back to our graph. So when we're in our cover left position and we go to aim, it'll perform the aim animation. And once we get up to the aim left position, it is going to go ahead and set that we can shoot. Now we don't need anything to change for the transition back down to our rifle walk from our aim left position here. But we do need it when we move from cover left to idle to switch over to being able to shoot again, because we're coming from this cover left where we can't. So I'm going to open up our cover left to idle animation. And we want to add this animation towards the end of the track. So based on our previous animation, it was about 5 bars in. So I'm going to right click on the graph, I'm going to add a notify, and we're going to add in our CanFire notify. And you can drag it and reposition it so it lines up properly. But I'm just going to line it up on that 5th bar. So we're going to go ahead and save this, and we'll go back to our graph. And we're going to have to do the same thing for our cover right side. So for cover right, we're going to add in notify at the beginning, and we're going to set it to cannot fire. So we'll save that animation. Back in our graph, we're going to open up our aim right, and we're going to right click on the graph. We're going to add a notify that we can fire, and we'll save that. And back in our graph, for our cover right to idle, we're going to open that up as well. And we're going to have to add in an anim notify in here, about 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 bars in. We'll add notify, and we'll set it to CanFire. And we'll save that. And I'm going to go ahead and compile and save this. And let's give it a test. So if we hit play, if I move up to cover here, I can shoot. And if I actually take cover, we see that it sets it to cannot fire. But if I go to aim, it sets it to can fire. And I can move around and fire from this position. But if I let go of the aim button, so this is interesting. If we go to our event graph here, we're setting can fire. Oh, and of course I made a mistake here. I forgot to set cannot fire and set can fire to false. So we'll go ahead and compile and save that. And let's try it again. So if I go into cover, I can't shoot from a cover position. If I aim, I can go ahead and fire and move around. And if I stop aiming, he stops firing, but it seems a little late for him to stop firing. So what's going on here is in our state machine, we're not setting cannot fire until we hit our cover left. So in order to take care of that, I'm going to open up our aim left to cover left. And we're going to add an anim notify in here at the very beginning. So I'm going to right click, add notify, and set cannot fire. We'll save that. And then back at our graph, we'll go ahead and do the same thing with the aim right to cover right. And we'll go ahead and right click, add notify, and set cannot fire. And then to try it out, I'm going to go into our aim left or our cover left. And I'm going to take out this cannot fire notification. And I'm going to do the same thing with the cover right. So we'll go ahead and delete that out of there and we'll save. And we'll go ahead and hit play. So let's see how this works. So if I pop out of cover and I start firing and then let go of the button, it'll set cannot fire as soon as we let go of the button. And if we pop in and out of cover now, it will set cannot fire appropriately. And one final issue that I found is if we hit play, I'm going to go ahead and we're going to sprint into cover, and then I'm going to stop sprinting and I'm going to let go of the forward motion key, and then I'm going to immediately hit the cover key. And we'll notice on our printout on the screen that CanFire was the last item to fire. So if I'm in cover now, I can fire from cover, and we don't want that to happen. So in order to fix that, we're going to go ahead and open up our cover left and cover right, and we're going to put those can and cannot fire animations back in there, or the notifies. So we're going to add our cannot fire back in at the very beginning here, and we're going to save, and then we're going to do the same thing for our cover right. And we'll compile and save, and we'll test it out. So if I sprint into cover, let go of the forward motion, and immediately hit the cover button, cannot fire is the last thing that ends up happening. And if I rail on that firing button, it doesn't allow us to shoot during the duration of that animation transition. And lastly, I'm just going to get rid of these print strings on the end here for testing purposes. We don't need those anymore. So I'm going to go ahead and compile and save. And that's going to complete the video for today. If you have any questions or comments, go ahead and leave them down below. And of course, thanks for watching.